Silence spread across the palace faster than anyone expected. When Catherine, Princess of Wales, stepped forward that morning, there was no ceremonial warmth, no familiar reassurance. Her voice was steady, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. For months, quiet questions had followed her youngest son. Moments that didn't quite add up. Smiles that faded too quickly. Appearances that suddenly stopped. Now, with cameras rolling and the world watching, Catherine chose honesty over comfort. And in doing so, she confirmed what many had quietly feared. Something was happening behind palace walls. Something involving Prince Louis that could no longer remain hidden. Britain held its breath. What had doctors uncovered? And why did this moment feel like a turning point no one was prepared for? At exactly 8:06 a.m. in London, a short statement appeared without warning. Phones lit up across kitchens, train platforms, and offices as Catherine's words spread in silence. There was no dramatic language, no attempt to soften reality. Just a careful admission that her youngest child was facing a situation requiring ongoing attention. No details. No labels. Just enough truth to end speculation without feeding it. In those few lines, the distance between royalty and ordinary life vanished. The monarchy, often wrapped in tradition and distance, suddenly felt painfully human, long before the public saw those words. The atmosphere inside Kensington Palace had already shifted. Days earlier, corridors had grown quieter. Staff moved slower, voices lowered, eyes avoiding questions they didn't dare ask. This wasn't a political crisis or a passing headline. This was personal. Catherine had carried the decision to speak for weeks. Torn between protecting her child and watching rumors grow sharper by the day. Missed engagements and quiet absences had begun drawing attention. Silence, once a shield, was starting to crack. Drafts of statements piled up late at night, rewritten again and again. Each version struggled with the same impossible balance. How do you tell the truth without exposing a child to a lifetime of scrutiny? William offered to take the responsibility himself, hoping to spare his wife the weight of it. Catherine refused. Those close to her say she was firm. This had to come from her. Not as a future queen, but as a mother. Across the country, the reaction was immediate. Television networks broke from regular programming. Anchors paused mid-sentence, unsure how to frame something so delicate. Outside Kensington Palace, people gathered quietly, phones still glowing in their hands. What struck many wasn't what Catherine said, but what she didn't. There were no medical terms, no timelines, no promises that everything would be fine. Just reality and a request for privacy. For some, it echoed memories of another princess whose vulnerability once reminded the world that crowns do not cancel pain. Inside a small sitting room, near her private study, Catherine read the statement one final time before it was released. Dawn light filtered through frost-covered windows as William stood beside her. When she admitted her fear, it wasn't about headlines. It was about her son's future. Titles meant nothing in that moment. By 8:07 a.m., the story had circled the globe. In 1 minute, the monarchy shifted from symbol to family, facing uncertainty like millions of others. Prince Louis, known publicly for his playful expressions and boundless energy, was suddenly at the center of concern he never asked for. The Wales family had fought hard to keep that reality private, and now they asked the world to step back, even as it leaned closer. Winter still clung to London, but inside the palace the season felt changed. Not broken, just altered. Looking back, some say the signs were always there, though easy to overlook. Life inside the Wales household had continued with its familiar rhythm. School mornings, garden walks, laughter echoing through hallways. But within that normality, small changes appeared. Louis tired sooner. Playtime ended earlier. Moments of stillness replaced his usual restlessness. To anyone else, it might have looked like nothing at all. To a mother, it lingered. Catherine noticed everything. How he leaned against cushions after playing. How he sometimes chose quiet over movement. One evening during a family meal, Louis rested his head against William's arm longer than usual. William brushed his hair, smiling, brushing it off as fatigue. But Catherine saw the pause in his eyes. Later, when she mentioned it, William reassured her gently. Still, a thin thread of worry tightened by early autumn. Discretion guided every decision. Appointments were arranged quietly. No announcements. No visible changes in security. Specialists were careful, suggesting tests without alarm. Catherine left those rooms with answers that weren't answers at all. And to sense that something delicate had shifted, staff began noticing changes too. Appearances involving the children were adjusted, then reduced. No explanations followed. Catherine continued her public duties flawlessly, but those close to her saw how often her attention drifted. A cough down a corridor made her pause. A message on her phone could pull her from meetings instantly. Even Charlotte seemed to sense it, staying close to her brother, reaching for his hand more often. The moment that stripped away Catherine's remaining calm arrived on an ordinary school morning. Louis paused at the foot of the stairs, not playful, not stubborn, but uncertain. His hand trembled slightly as he steadied himself. Catherine knelt, smoothed his jumper, kissed his cheek, and sent him off. Then she closed her study door and sat in silence, hands clasped tightly together. That morning, she asked for further evaluations to be moved forward. From then on, the palace grew quieter still. Meetings shifted behind closed doors. Long-serving aides avoided speculation, yet couldn't ignore the tension. At a family gathering at Windsor, Louis paused on cold stone steps, rubbing his arm. Princess Anne noticed immediately. Across the terrace, Catherine met her gaze without hiding the truth. Later, away from the children, Anne placed a steady hand on Catherine's shoulder. Catherine's reply was simple. She just wanted clarity. By early winter, confidentiality became absolute. Documents were secured. Schedules masked. King Charles was informed carefully, piece by piece. Camilla reached out privately, offering support without strategy. Whatever this was, it was real, and tradition offered no comfort. When the findings finally came, they did not bring panic. They brought permanence. Not a crisis of survival, but a reality that would shape routines and decisions for years to come. Relief and grief arrived together. Relief in understanding. Grief for a future now rewritten. William read every line carefully, already thinking ahead to protection, privacy, and the cost of public curiosity. This would be faced as parents first. Only a small circle was informed, not by rank, but by trust. This wasn't secrecy for image. It was space to breathe. Yet pressure grew. Absences don't go unnoticed. Silence invites speculation. Catherine wrestled with timing, knowing winter has a way of exposing what silence tries to hide. One evening, she stood beside her son's bed, watching him sleep peacefully. In that moment, she understood something grounding. He was still the same child, curious, bright, loved. The world's responsibility toward him had changed, not his spirit. Then came the moment no one wanted. A minor administrative slip. A coded reference noticed by the wrong eyes. Nothing explicit, just enough to raise dangerous curiosity. Within hours, inquiries began. Polite at first, then persistent. The message was clear. Silence was no longer protection. It was becoming a risk. Late one night, exhaustion gave way to resolve. Around a quiet table, the decision settled without drama. If the truth was to be told, it would be told carefully by Catherine herself. Not as damage control, but as dignity. The morning she spoke, Windsor felt unusually still. Catherine sat composed. Drafts pushed aside in favor of her own words. Simple, careful, honest. William stood beside her, knowing what this would cost. When the announcement went public, the reaction was instant. But inside the palace, the family gathered quietly. Catherine held her son close, whispering reassurance that mattered more than any headline. What this means going forward remains uncertain. Some royal watchers suggest Louis may appear less publicly. Others believe Catherine will guard family life more fiercely than ever. No one knows the full path ahead, and that's exactly as it should be. Because this was never a story about titles or tradition. It was about a mother choosing truth over rumor, love over silence, and reminding the world that behind the crown, there is still a family facing the future one careful step at a time. Sometimes the loudest truths are spoken quietly. And even after the statements settled into the public consciousness, the ripple effects didn't fade. If anything, they deepened. The days that followed felt slower, heavier, as if the country itself was adjusting its breath. Commentators lowered their tone. Headlines softened. For once, speculation took a backseat to empathy. It wasn't the words Catherine used that lingered most. It was the restraint. The sense that something deeply personal had been shared only because silence had become more harmful than truth. Inside the Wales household, life didn't pause, but it did recalibrate. Mornings became more deliberate. Plans were made with flexibility rather than certainty. What outsiders often forget is that diagnoses, even unnamed ones, don't arrive as singular moments. They unfold. They reshape how time is measured. For Catherine and William, the focus narrowed to what mattered immediately. School days that felt manageable. Good afternoons. Energy conserved, not spent. Progress defined quietly, away from cameras. Those close to the family say Catherine became even more present if that was possible. Less distracted by ceremony, more anchored in routine. Simple moments carried new weight. Walks through the gardens. Stories read aloud. Laughter that arrived unexpectedly and stayed longer than fear ever could. In those moments, the world outside faded. The noise, the theories, the endless need for answers. None of it mattered when her son smiled. Still, the monarchy does not exist in isolation. Every choice, even the most personal, carries consequence. Royal watchers began to notice subtle shifts. Fewer wide-angle family appearances. More controlled settings. An emphasis on early childhood causes spoken with unusual tenderness. Some suggested these were coincidences. Others believed they were intentional. A quiet reshaping of priorities that had been building for months. What remained striking was what never happened. No leaks, no corrections, no follow-up clarifications. The palace held its line. And in doing so, it sent a message without ever stating it outright. This story would not be expanded for consumption. It would not be dramatized for clicks. The details belong to a child, not the public. For a monarchy often criticized for distance, that boundary felt unusually firm. As winter eased into early spring, life slowly found a new rhythm. Not the old one, a different one. One built around awareness rather than assumption. Catherine returned to select engagements, her presence calm but changed. Those who watched closely noticed it. A steadiness sharpened by experience. A softness earned through struggle. She spoke often about resilience, about listening, about protecting childhood. Never directly. Always with intention. Prince Louis, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the meaning others attached to his name. To him, days were still measured in games, questions, and affection. And perhaps that was the quiet victory Catherine had been fighting for all along. Not control over a narrative, but preservation of innocence. What happens next isn't written. And maybe that uncertainty is the point. Life rarely offers neat conclusions, especially when it involves children, growth, and change. What this moment revealed wasn't weakness within the royal family, but strength shaped by love and restraint. A reminder that even under the heaviest spotlight, some truths deserve to remain softly held. And long after headlines move on, one image lingers. A mother choosing when to speak. A family choosing how much to share. And a quiet understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say just enough and no more. Even now, months later, that moment continues to echo in subtle ways. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the spaces where expectations once lived. The royal calendar looks familiar on the surface, yet those who follow it closely can sense the difference. Engagements are chosen with more care. Family appearances feel more intentional, less frequent, and more contained. It's not withdrawal, it's protection. There's also a noticeable shift in how Catherine carries herself publicly. Not weaker, not guarded, but grounded. When she speaks about children, about well-being, about listening instead of assuming, the words land differently now. They're no longer abstract ideas tied to charity work. They sound lived in, earned. Some viewers describe it as a quiet authority that wasn't there before, shaped not by training, but by experience, behind closed doors. Those familiar with the household say the family has grown closer in ways that can't be staged. William has adjusted his schedule more than ever, prioritizing presence over protocol when he can. Charlotte and George have become quietly protective, instinctively aware that their brother needs space, patience, and normalcy more than anything else. There's no drama in it, just adaptation. Speculation, of course, hasn't disappeared entirely. It never does. Online forums still debate what isn't known. Commentators still read between lines that were never meant to be read. But the tone has changed. The hunger for answers has softened into something closer to respect. Perhaps because Catherine never invited curiosity. She acknowledged reality, then closed the door gently behind it, and that may be the most defining part of this chapter. Not the announcement itself, but what followed. No updates. No explanations. No performance of reassurance. Just consistency. A quiet insistence that some parts of life are not public property, even when lived under a crown. For a monarchy often accused of clinging too tightly to image, this restraint felt different, almost modern, almost defiant. It suggested a future where duty does not automatically override dignity, especially when children are involved. And for many watching, that shift mattered more than any detail ever could, in time. Prince Louis will grow, adapt, and define himself far beyond this moment. Whatever challenges lie ahead will be his to face, supported by a family that has already shown how fiercely it will protect him. And when that day comes, this chapter will likely be remembered not for what was said, but for what was handled with care. Because in a world that demands constant access and endless explanation, Catherine chose something quieter. She chose boundaries. She chose her child. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply stands firm, speaks once, and lets silence do the rest. And perhaps that is why this moment continues to resonate long after the headlines faded. It wasn't dramatic in the way royal history often is. There were no sweeping speeches, no visible crisis, no forced show of unity. Instead, it unfolded in pauses, in absences, in choices that quietly reshaped expectations. The kind of changes you only notice when you're paying close attention. Those who study the monarchy have pointed out how rare this approach truly is. In the past, uncertainty was often met with either rigid silence or overwhelming exposure. This time, it was different. Catherine acknowledged reality just enough to stop the noise, then refused to feed it further. That balance, many believe, will influence how future generations of royals handle personal struggles. Not as spectacles to be managed, but as lives to be protected. There is also a deeper shift happening beneath the surface. Causes once discussed in careful neutral terms are now approached with unmistakable empathy. When Catherine speaks about early childhood development, emotional well-being, or the importance of safe environments, it no longer sounds like advocacy from a distance. It feels personal. Viewers sense it, and that connection, born from hardship, has quietly strengthened public trust. Meanwhile, life for the Wales family continues in its redefined rhythm. School runs remain private. Weekends are guarded fiercely. Joy is found in ordinary moments that never make it into photographs. To the outside world, it may appear uneventful. But within those boundaries lies intention. A deliberate effort to give one child what the spotlight often takes away: space. What's striking is how little the family seems interested in correcting assumptions. There are no efforts to shape narratives or clarify misunderstandings. That silence isn't weakness. It's confidence. Confidence that the truth doesn't need constant reinforcement. Confidence that love, consistency, and time will speak louder than any explanation ever could. And perhaps that's the lesson this chapter quietly offers. Not just about royalty, but about parenthood under pressure, about knowing when to speak and when to stop, about understanding that some stories aren't meant to be followed in real time, but respected from a distance. Years from now, this period may be reduced to a footnote in royal timelines, a brief mention, a single paragraph. But for the family living it, it marked a profound turning point, one that reshaped priorities, strengthened bonds, and redefined what duty looks like when weighed against love. In the end, nothing about this story was loud. And that's exactly why it mattered. A mother spoke once, carefully, then stepped back. A family closed ranks without shutting the world out completely. And a quiet truth was allowed to exist without being consumed. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones that demand attention. They're the ones that endure quietly, long after the noise has moved on.